Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming out. We've got a terrific panel here. I'll try not to create too much feedback. So to start with, rather than introducing the whole panel, I'm going to have them go down the line. We'll start with Matt here and make their own introductions, tell you a little bit about themselves, and then we'll get going with the questions. Matt, you want to tell us your background, tell us how you got here.
Awesome. I'm Matt Frisbie. Thanks, Robert. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at a company called Nameify. We have a platform called AXOMO that you see out here. And as you can see, I'm a huge fan of food. I love food, I love fruit, I love pies, I love pizzas. I just love food. And so I'm grateful to be here at an HR conference.
And as a Lions fan, I let him still be on the panel. So
thank you.
We're getting along.
Appreciate that. Yeah.
Emma?
Okay. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Emma E. Houston. I am the Assistant Vice President for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at the University of Utah. I've been in Salt Lake City since 1986, so Utah is home. Dallas is home, but Utah is home. It's a pleasure to be in your space today.
Hello, everybody. I'm Wes Porter. I'm the Director of Culture and Engagement for the state of Utah. I work inside government operations, and I'm housed in HR and DHRM. So my background, I'm a rural employee, so I live out in Vernal, Utah. And so I drove out this morning. So anybody ever been to Vernal? You took a wrong turn? Yeah, that's usually how you get there. But no, Dinosaur Land is fantastic out there. We love it out there. Excited to be on the panel today to talk about some of the different strategies that we've utilized in the state and to learn from, of course, you and this wonderful panel. So thanks for having me.
Great. Whitney?
And I'm Whitney Harper. I'm Senior Vice President of People at Extra Space Storage, which we're the largest publicly traded company headquartered here in Utah. And it is physical storage. We don't do cloud, but the actual physical storage is what we do. So that wasabi green signs you see, that's Extra Space Storage. Thrilled to be here today.
Terrific. All right. So we're going to start by talking about how to make people feel included and belonging. A big part of that is making them feel heard, or making them comfortable to feel heard and seen. So Emma, we're going to start with you. How can you promote that feeling of inclusion and feeling heard and seen in an organization? And how do you make everybody feel like they're part of the conversation? What are some tips and tricks you've got?
As I started out thank you for that question. As I started out this morning, I said, good morning. And there was complete silence for a moment. Was there not? There was complete silence. One of the things that I make a habit of doing is saying good morning, good afternoon, good evening, because what is important is for individuals to be seen. And when we do that acknowledgement that I am in your space, I see you, you see me, the easiest way to do it is to greet someone. So when you're thinking about how do you help people feel included, acknowledge their presence, simply acknowledge their presence. And then the conversation can start from there. Knowing that individuals, however they got to work that morning, they may have drove from Vernal and took the wrong turn, and however they got to that space this morning, it may have been a challenge. So just greeting someone on a regular basis, making that pause, making that acknowledgement that I see you is one of the very first steps in creating a space of inclusivity. So when you're thinking about how do I show up in my authentic self, and knowing that everyone do not have the opportunity to show up in their authentic selves, whatever that looks like. But creating that space of welcoming, creating that culture of acknowledging individuals is the first start in doing that. Once you get that out of the way, it is also looking at how do you retain individuals? Because once you recruit individuals into your space, your retention is also part of inclusivity as well. I'm going to stop right there.
We're going to come back to that for sure. But I like your point because it just draws people in. It's not us. It takes down that barrier. Wes, do you have any thoughts on this question?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I really appreciate Emma's comments on that, especially when you work in. I don't think anybody woke up when they're 12-year-olds and say, hey, I want to work for state government, or I want to work for the feds. And what's interesting about that, it has some unique challenges. But one thing that I've learned over the years, this example that was actually shared with me from Dr. Jones, and I've shared it before, how many in here are right-handed? Raise your hand. All right, how many in here are left-handed? Okay, a couple. Do we live in a right-handed world or a left-handed world?
Right-handed.
Give me an example. That's scissors, right? Where you sit. I have a left-handed friend. I didn't realize this, but they have to be very deliberate and strategic on where they sit when you go out to eat, right? All right, so my left-handed people, or excuse me, my right-handed people, when we woke up this morning, I'm right-handed, did we just thump ourselves on the chest and say, power to my people, the right-handed people rule, because I can use scissors whenever I want? Of course we didn't. Of course we didn't. But what's interesting about it is we, as right-handed people, sometimes we think that things are just the norm. Things are just happening because we're having the same experience. But what's interesting is people right next to us that are left-handed, even though we're going out to eat, we're eating the same thing, we have access to the same types of food, what's interesting is they're having a different experience. And so when we think about how do we make people feel included and feel welcome, we take a minute and we realize that sometimes the norm comes from the majority. And we need to sit and realize that maybe this person who I sit next to all the time, who can do the same things that I can do, but in a different way, are having different challenges. And so the first step, specifically in leadership, and even HR, when we're developing our job description, interview questions, whatever that might be, is to stop and realize what about my experience is transferring into everything I do, and how do I get the different perspectives? I think if we could figure that piece out, specifically as HR professionals, as leaders, what we can do is realize those perspectives will allow us to make better decisions. And more importantly, it'll allow our people that we work with to feel like they're heard, they're included, and that you recognize them. And when you recognize them and when they're able to be heard, like what Emma was saying, that's when magic can happen.
Whitney, you want to take a shot?
Oh man, so many great comments. That's a tough act to follow. Yeah, I mean, I really echo what you're sharing as well. And I think that part of it also is making that it's a conversation that's safe to have, and that you're also using language that is accessible to individuals, to make sure that, when we talk about DEI, we talk about inclusiveness, that we're not using language that all of a sudden can feel jargony or can feel like, I don't know what those words mean, and can make people feel like, oh, how do I express myself? I love the analogy of the left-handed versus right-handed. How does a left-handed person say, hey, I need different scissors, or hey, I need to sit in this spot? And so creating those opportunities to listen to those perspectives and to be open to that.
Awesome, these are great comments.
Yeah.
Something I heard along these lines that really stuck with me is the shortest distance between two people is a story. And that unites all of us, is that we all have a story. We all have experiences that we can share. And I have found I like to lead with that, and I love to share. I kind of overshare. I'm an extroverted extrovert recovering from extrovertedness. And so, but it's real. And when that was taught to me, I was like, wow, I didn't realize that. And some of my best friends have, feel like they can share their story. And so I make a point like, am I someone that wants to be heard? Am I showing how open I am by asking open-ended questions and inviting that and trying to get to their story? And you have that to share now. It's a special thing that you can share no matter who you are, no matter where you're from. And I'm sorry that you're a Detroit fan, we'll get through it. But we can now talk about it. And I didn't wear this accidentally. I loved your comment about authenticity. I can go anywhere in any airport in any city, and I'll either get a high five or a dirty look. And the person with the dirty look will have more to talk about than the person I'll high five, because the person I'll high five, we just get each other, right? But we'll talk forever about this or that, and it's because I'm my authentic self. I have brainwashed my children, and that probably wasn't good, but yeah, just really be yourself and be comfortable in your own skin, and it invites people to come talk to you, so.
It is funny, the first thing I said to him is, despite you being a Packers fan, happy to have you here. So Whitney, following up a little bit on what you said, you talked about the language we use, right? And the language has to be inclusive. How do we do that more effectively? What is inclusive language in your eyes, and how do we create a space where that can be effective and productive?
Sure, and I hope this is helpful, that you can learn on our own mistakes. I think we came out the last couple of years and really were like, okay, we want to be very clear that this is DEI language, and we want to kind of the education component, that there's new terms that help to define experiences like intersectionality or code switching. And we did some surveys and also talking to team members, and and also reading kind of market trends, and realized a lot of people felt like, I feel like I'm out of step, or I'm kind of not educated enough to be part of the conversation. And so we kind of scratched our heads and we're like, oh, whoa, that's not the experience we want individuals to have. And so I think part of the DEI journey is we are always trying to say, where can we meet people where they're at, wherever they're at on their journey. And so language is really important to be able to kind of connect with individuals and to make sure that it's inclusive language. And then we found we were using language that was excluding individuals because they felt uncomfortable or didn't know the terms. So this year, our strategy has really been to make sure that the language is highly accessible and that, looking for that feedback to say, okay, using a term and does that connect well with this audience, or is it something we need to kind of adjust or clarify that definition? So that's been kind of a switch that we've made to make sure that we're presenting things in ways that are palatable, that also individuals can understand and connect with the messaging as well.
Yeah, the terminology is so important in this environment, these exchanges. Does anybody have pointers about ways that they've found effective or the tricks that they've used? What can people take back to their workplace?
One of the things that the University of Utah did when we were talking about equity, diversity, and inclusion, we had so many of our team members give a definition of what they thought it was. So we brought all our stakeholders together to say, okay, this is what equity, diversity, inclusion, belonging, access looks like for the University of Utah. Let's create our consistent language. And so we had about 75 individuals in the room creating the definitions of what we believed equity, diversity, inclusion, belonging, access would mean at the University of Utah. So when you go to the College of Law, they're speaking the same language. When you go into the College of Health, we're speaking the same language. So when new employees come in, they understand this is the values of the University of Utah. This is how we define equity, diversity, inclusion, belonging, access. So now we're all holding ourselves accountable for what those consistent definitions are and what the language is and how we attach those to our values. We got buy-in.
Well, and that's critical because it doesn't work without that, right? You got to get the buy-in from the Wes. Do you want to take a?
Yeah, absolutely. So what's interesting is when we look at this specifically for language, one of the things we looked at the state is how do we turn these strategies that we're talking about today into a values-based proposition, right? How do we make sure that things are integrated into not just how we do things, not just what we do, but to who we are? And one thing that we found is specifically when we're writing job descriptions, we have a tendency to use words that can mean multiple different things that are bigger than they need to be, right? We talk about the tertiary act of the flux capacitor tied to the work, whatever. And we go through this rabbit hole of all these different things. And what we're finding is if we focus on the simplicity to have words that actually connect to everybody, that everyone can understand, that's where the language that we're kind of seeing a renaissance in how we do job descriptions to attract the best individuals and to widen our applicant pool as much as possible. And we do this because we're focusing on skills. That's one of our values, right? Is make sure that we have these people that can come in and they have something to share. How do we make sure we get the best out of them? And how do they know what we're asking for? And how do we know what they're telling us? And so when we talk about inclusive language, we're talking about values. We tie every action that we do in our HR processes to a value. And if we can't tie a specific action to a value, whatever value might be, service, proximity, loyalty, whatever it might be, if we can't tie an act to a value, we don't do it. And that includes our inclusive language because we're able to tie that to proximity. How close are we to the people that we serve in the state of Utah? And once we tie that, it's amazing to see some of the barriers, some of the challenges we see start to kind of go away. And what happens is threatening turns into challenging. And we all love challenges. That's why we do the things we do for challenges, but threatening goes away and we focus on challenges.
Can you give us an example of the way you've connected those two? I mean, a value that you feel is tied to your HR
No,
practices?
absolutely. I think the big one is probably Governor Cox's initiative specifically towards skill-based hiring. One of the challenges that we've had is for the last 100 years or whatever, when we look at hiring managers, we would give a premium to education. Right? We give a premium to having that piece of paper, that bachelor's degree, the master's degree, the doctorate, whatever it might be. And what's interesting, when we started talking about skills first, there's a little bit of an obstacle, a little bit of pushback saying, hey, you're devaluing education. It's like, that's not necessarily the case. What we're doing is say, with education and with skills, we can actually come together and have a good applicant that can do the job in a great way possible that we might not have looked at before. And we started having these button heads with some of the hiring managers over time. And really what we did is we need to understand, one of our values is proximity. We need to understand where we are when it comes to the people that we serve. And when we looked at our jobs, and the state of Utah is the second largest employer in the state, right behind Heather Brace's team at Intermountain. And when we look at the jobs, most of our jobs said, hey, you need to have a degree, we'll give you lots of points. But when we looked at statute, less than 5% of all the jobs in the state of Utah working for state government needed that particular requirement. And so once we realized that, hey, we're here to meet the people where they're at, that obstacle kind of went away. We still had a little bit of friction, but it went away because we're focusing on our value, which is our proximity towards the people that we serve. And we've had some really neat success there, and we're going to have more success as we move forward, and as we refine our systems, refine our processes, it's going to be pretty neat. So I'm excited to see where it goes.
Okay, Matt, do you want to talk about how you use inclusive language in your workplace and how to bring people in?
From a different angle. We're a small organization. We're about 200 employees. I started my career at Disney where there was 22,000 employees. And so how you manage an enterprise organization versus an SMB, they're very different. And so we're benefited that we're privately held, and so we get to decide, how we're going to be. But we actually talk about body language, specifically smiling. And so every Thursday at 2 o'clock, we walk the whole manufacturing facility with a box of snacks. And so obviously Snickers are the best choice, right? Are we good there? But there's everything. There's like chips and healthy snacks, but the point of it is actually to just walk in and smile and say hello. And so body language is something we talk about. We actually were just at an offsite talking about smiling. Like I can smile at you and you can't help but smile back. See? It's contagious. And it's something I love to do, but you never know who needs a smile. And so these points are critical to create structure and process. But from human heart to human heart, you never know who's had a rough night, a rough morning. And our kids had a lot of finishing the term. And so they were a little stressed out. And I was like, let's go bowling, right? And you never know who's had a rough night, who's had a difficult situation. And so we like to take that approach, is that we talked for an hour and a half about smiling and how critical that is. And it actually benefits you the most, which is the odd thing. You're trying to give something, but you as an individual are benefited the most from giving something away. And you can't help the energy that is exchanged between two people, like a bad football team and a good football team. Like, we can still like each other, it's just a good exchange of energy and love and fun that comes from that. So we've talked about body language a lot.
How'd that NFC Championship game go for you?
Sucks.
Oh yeah, never mind.
Nice
Sorry.
comeback.
We'll come back to that. So you kind of touched on this next question I've got on my list here, but it's about retaining a diverse workforce. Building it is one thing, but if you don't retain it, you're constantly rebuilding it. And so we're talking about how you make your company more welcoming from an organizational structure. That's sort of the incentive programs you got. I assume it's more than just Snickers bars, though. What else do you do?
King size?
The king size.
All right. So one of the things that I've learned over the years is I think it's less about trying to fit somebody else's desires or parameters, and more like bring them into a problem. I love the challenge component. We have really fun problems to solve. And so we're a promotional products company, and we have an employee engagement platform, and it's a swag store. And so our whole thing is that we want employees to be able to pick the swag they want. And so unlike other companies, you don't have to buy a high volume from us. You can get a hat with a logo, and nobody else in your company got that hat. And they're like, where'd you get that sweet hat, dude? And you're like, oh, on our store. And they're like, really? And you're like, I got socks. See those? So you just never know. And so what I learned, and my takeaway is that problem solving was the greatest invitation. Problem solving will invite the best minds, the best energy. And so I recently watched a video, and I've trained this with the team. There's a story of this Belgian workhorse. This Belgian workhorse, so strong, can pull 8,000 pounds on a sled. And so if you were to add a second horse, what would you think that would go to? So if you did your math right, 16,000. When you pair two Belgian workhorses, they can pull 32,000 pounds because they are equally yoked on the problem. And that's true for all of us. And so we've identified that communicating the problem we're trying to solve has really invited the right people. We have an excellent culture because everybody agrees on the problem. And so our mission is to solve this one problem. And so we're pulling 32,000 pounds because we agree on the problem. and it really invites top talent. So that's our perspective.
Anybody else want to take a crack at this one?
I think the University of Utah, I'm always going to lead with that. The University of Utah, we have a program called the New Leadership Academy. And one of the components is shared equity leadership. And what we have discovered that we send our top leaders to all of the trainings. You all are here today, top leaders to all of the trainings. But then when they go back to their spaces, how often do they share it with everyone in their spaces? So our shared equity leadership program is that all of our top leaders have gone through this leadership academy. Then they invite all of their members to also go through the academy. And what that does is this, shared problems. That if a leader sees a problem, how are they going to share it without their team? So once the team is involved in accountability to the leader and to themselves, they can solve the problems together. I'm going to give you an example. Our HR team came together and said that an applicant came to fill out an application, brought a hard copy application to the place that they were applying to. The individual said, you need to do this online. You need to get an account. You need to create your resume. You need to create a cover letter. You need to submit this through our electronic platform. Our HR team said, that's a barrier. That's a barrier. How can we help someone whose language was not primary English, was not primary? And so we had an HR individual sit down with this person, go online, create a profile for them, walk them through the process, help them update a resume, all of the things that you do electronically. Submitted the job application through the portal. Anybody got a portal? Submitted it through the portal. The person received the job. What do you think that person did to the community when they left the University of Utah HR? They went and told everyone how someone eliminated a barrier for them because they understood their need, they understood the challenges that they were going through, they helped them navigate the space. So when you have your leaders and also those that we supervise working together to be accountable for each other, they can see a problem and they can solve it together. So that's University of Utah gets to do that.
Yeah, I was also thinking about building on their comments about retention, and I have about 6,000 employees out of our 7,500 that work in our storage facilities. And so we do a ton of work to attract that really wide net and bring them in. But to your point about how does diversity lead to retention and guiding that, and it's a challenge. I have 54% turnover of my hourly employees last year. And so the things we have to do to think about that diversity, and our customers are, they're typically not coming to us on their best day. They're usually dealing with death, divorce, deployment, moving, high stress situations. And then my team members are on the receiving end of that total emotional experience that they're having. And so what's been helpful for us is that I can't always prevent the aggression or the challenges that they're going to experience from our customers. However, I think that creating ERGs or places where individuals that they can feel a sense of community, and when they have those tough days or they identify a barrier of something that is preventing them from being able to serve the customer better or to grow in their career, engaging and making that space to listen to them and hear those ideas and that perspective, that's helping us to understand why people are staying with us, and then also looking at data and to understand exit interviews. Why are people walking out the door? So then we can start working earlier in the process to understand what we can do to help retain those individuals as well.
Wes, you want to talk about retaining state workers? I'm sure you guys, it's a challenge right now, right?
What's interesting about it is when we look at retention, really we understand that the first step in retention is onboarding. And I was onboarded as a rural employee. In fact, I was kind of the guinea pig. They said, my supervisor said, okay, I need you to stay in Vernal. I don't want you to come out here for anything. We're going to figure out how this works. So they're going to send me a computer. They're going to send me, this is where you go for your fingerprints. This is what you can do here. You can do all these different things. And here's what's interesting about it. It was probably the best onboarding experience that I've had, in the sense that it forced connections in a way that I probably wouldn't have seen before. And what's happening is, John, my supervisor, what he did is he set up meetings for me. He's like, okay, I need you to meet these people. He was deliberate about the people that I need to meet. But as opposed to, he's like, hey, make sure you go say hi to so-and-so over here in this particular department. He manually set it up so I can have that virtual meeting with them and talk to them about what they do without any distractions. And what happened was, I felt like I was part of this team. I felt like I knew the team faster than I did in previous positions where I was inside the brick and mortar building for onboarding. And it created some connections. And it's kind of an odd dynamic because, remote work still has its challenges. But what I found is it created connections for me as a remote worker that I haven't seen before, even working in my small town, with people who live all over the Wasatch Front who I normally wouldn't speak to. And so we focus on that onboarding piece. If we can have that good experience, I think some of the data suggests that as well, that if you have that good onboarding experience at the beginning, your attrition rate is going to go low. Right? And you're going to stay there longer for retention. And so we really focus on that those first couple weeks are absolutely crucial to make sure that they feel that they can belong and they can thrive. And we're seeing some dividends getting paid.
So they met you physically where you were, yeah. and from a sort of workforce standpoint. My next question was going to be about making the parts greater than the whole greater than the sum of the parts, but I think you guys kind of addressed that. Unless somebody wants to take another swing at it, we can move on. Okay. So when people say, well, why are we bothering with all of this, right? You guys all are good at measuring data. That's what businesses do. That's what state governments do. How do you make the case for them? What data do you show them? And how would our group here look to collect that data? What are sort of the key points that you're looking for? And Wes, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Data is really important, and I'll say a couple of things, and then I'll pass them to the rest of the group. But when we look at data, especially in this type of work, when we think of data, we think of demographic data. And one of the challenges that we've seen specifically in this work over the last few years is the connotation that demographic data has. And we have, especially on the HR side, we have let that demographic data actually start driving our decision making, start driving decisions within the organization, start driving strategy and different things like that. And we've also seen a negative thing with that type of data when we look at it just for what is right in front of us. And that is, hey, I don't have enough of this demographic, I must be doing something wrong. I don't have enough of this demographic, that person must be doing something wrong. And my only advice when it comes to data is that data is where you are, not who you are. And when we think about data, one of the things that we really focus on at the state is, of course, the demographic data is huge. Who we serve and having the perspective of those people that we serve in our ranks is so important, or we can't do our job and we can't do it effectively. And so when we look at data, the data points that we grab are in our processes, specifically on the HR side, our hiring processes. The data that I grab is what are the types of questions that we ask, how many questions do we ask, how many interviews do we have, what types of interviews do we have. We look at our job descriptions, what we talk about inclusive language, right? What kind of language are we used for this type of job description? What kind of interview processes are found for this type of job versus this type of job? Is there a disparity between how we execute our process with a cabinet level position versus an entry level position? And what's happening is, as we start looking at those data points, now we have data points that we can actually drive into our current processes and procedures. We have data points that we can actually pivot on in our current process and procedures. And what's happening is, those demographic data points start to move on their own when you deliberately look at your internal processes and procedures with an eye towards your culture, with an eye towards inclusion and belonging. And by focusing on what's in front of us that we can actually change today, as opposed to looking at demographic numbers like, oh, we just need to do something else, we're seeing some really good dividends as far as who's represented now in the state of Utah government. And we've seen a lot of that specifically with the skills base. We've seen a lot of that with the returnship program. And we're very excited that, with one of our values is proximity, those data points inside of our processes and procedures are now turning into really good demographic data points because we're focusing on the right thing.
Why don't we come to you, and then we'll go to Emma, and then down to Whitney on this one.
Yeah, when you talk about retention, when you talk about loyalty, they affect the bottom line. When I was at Disney, they spent $42,000 to onboard an employee, and then another $15,000 to exit them. So, plan for that cost. And so all these things that you do that are the ethos of the company, the culture, they matter. I have a friend that works for Boeing, and he and I have talked a lot about what's kept him there. He's on year 23. They paid for his undergraduate degree. So while he was in the parts department, he got an undergraduate degree. And he became a middle manager. And after that, he's now at the company 5 or 6 years. They then paid for his graduate degree. So they're about $150K into his education, but he's on year 23. So if you divide $150K by 23, Boeing's done the math on this. That's retention dollars. And think of the value that he's created for them after 23 years. He's given them a lifetime. And how many of us have employees that have been with one company for a lifetime? And so the organization I was at had 100% turnover in manufacturing during COVID. And it decimated our bottom line. And we had to report to the bank, we had to report to our investors, and it was real. And so what were we doing about it? But the data is dependent on what you value. There's a great book called The Infinite Game.
So once they're done, Steve is going to do it.
We are having some hot mic. Think about how you create a timeline for your data. That's also important. I loved what Wes said, but are you measuring it in quarters? Are you measuring it in years? I know a lot of organizations that have abandoned that are moving to generational measurement. What is happening to the lifetime of our company? And they're saving money during downtimes to invest back into their people. Your people are your business. No matter what you sell, no matter what you do, no matter software you have, or if it's a physical storage space, a university, your people are everything. And so they're starting to become generational in the way they think. They're removing timelines because of the data. What they care about is retention. What they care about is loyalty. And the path that we've learned is that your onboarding connection leads to commitment. Commitment leads to loyalty. And you can get to loyalty in no other way. And so the onboarding points, what experience have you planned? What is the development, learning and development plan that you have for these employees? And then what are you rewarding for long-term loyalty? And so the book is called The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek. And he gives lots of examples, like the Vietnam War, we were measuring the wrong things. He was giving other examples of Apple versus Microsoft. One company's trying to beat the other's trying to solve a customer problem. And so depending on your timeline is going to change how you measure what. And so that's something that I'd propose that we're looking at.
What data do you look to?
The thing that we look at the University of Utah, you knew I was going to say that, right? We are preparing students to be successful, that when they leave the college campus and they apply for positions at your organizations, that we have equipped them. So in order for that to happen, we have to understand when a first generational student comes to the University of Utah, what resources do they need? What support do they need? How can we help them be successful? So we have created programs that help guide them along the way, to help navigate them along the way. So our data is pulled from students' needs. What do I need to be successful? Who's going to help me navigate this campus life? And when I leave the University of Utah, how equipped am I going to be? We have 4 student centers that fall under the Division of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. We have our American Indian Resource Center. We have our Black Culture Center. We have our Center for Equity and Student Belonging, and we have our Dream Center. But we also have an HBCU Impact. We invite students from historically Black colleges and universities to intern in the state of Utah. Now, when you think about that, you've got someone from Southern Methodist University or Howard University coming to the state of Utah to intern for local communities, corporations, the Utah Jazz, KSL, Quatrix, they come to do that. When they leave this space, we do a survey, and what they say is that what I thought Utah was not what I experienced. So when you have diversity coming from different states saying that Utah is a good place, the University of Utah is listening to the needs of students and are equipping us to be successful, that's where we look at the data. How successful are we being with the students who are going to be employed by many of you out there in the community?
Whitney, you want to talk about the data component?
That's a huge component. The love language in my organization is data, as I imagine in many of yours. I'm like, that's a great idea, Whitney, where's the data? Prove it to me. And so this has been a huge focus for my HR team to make sure we're really data literate and data analytics. And then the other component to it is really turn my team into smoke spotters. And what I mean by that is we do a lot of data, and we do a lot of surveys, and we hear kind of anecdotal things. And so what I've trained my team to really be is we're looking for smoke, and sometimes, and in particular, trends. And if we see like, ooh, their inclusion scores dropped, consistently over the last 6 months, and why is that? And we don't necessarily want to assume that there's a bad actor, but it's being able to spot where that smoke is, and then getting curious to understand why is that data showing up the way it is, and continuing to analyze it in a variety of different ways and staying close to the individuals to understand what's going on there. So that's one of it. And then the second thing is really being careful not to weaponize the data. And so that's something where I want to be careful that people still feel like it's safe, that they can respond to these surveys, and that we're going to listen when they have specific comments that they share. But also, we don't ever want this to be a punitive thing of going to a leader and being like, your inclusion score dropped, like you're now on, you're on a watch list sort of thing. Like that's not the approach you want to have by any means. It's a collective problem solving, curiosity, how can we learn about this, but learning to recognize where there is smoke so we can then hopefully be predictive in that data and starting to get proactive about how we address some of those issues.
Just got a couple minutes left, and I've been told to play us off like it's Oscar night. But I do want to talk a little bit about including young workers, making young workers feel like, whether they're interns or students, incoming workers, feel like they can express themselves, and also how senior leadership can empower those young people, or at least listen to those young people's ideas. Emma, you work with a lot of young people at the University of Utah. Do you want to take this one first, and then we'll try to squeeze as much in as we can in the 3 minutes we've got?
Well, I think one of the things that we do know that our younger generations are not afraid to express their thoughts and their opinions. And we open doors for them to serve on various committees, be on various opportunities to be interns in the presidential, as a presidential intern. So we open those doors to actively listen. One of the things that we do with our students is create space where, even if they disagree with what the administration has done, that we guide them as to how to disagree. There's one thing to protest, but there's another thing to follow the guidelines so your protest can be heard and can be received in a manner. So when we're talking about what does that look like to bring those voices to the table, we bring the voices to the table, and we give them the opportunity to speak on their behalf, which also leads to creating change, creates to eliminating barriers as well. So we invite the conversation to flow freely.
Wes, you want to talk about this one?
Yeah, like I said earlier, there's just a bunch of grade school kids that really want to be a state bureaucrat when they grow up. And tapping into that group has been a challenge, obviously. But what's interesting about it is when we look at how do we encourage, especially on the generational side, one thing that we focused on is really, one of the first things I did is did an audit. I did an audit to see where in our policy, where in our procedures, where in our cultural norms do we have space for connection. And I don't mean just the meetings, I don't mean just working together on a certain project, but I mean actual connections. And one thing at the state that we have one-on-ones with our supervisor, and one-on-ones aren't that mysterious, but what's interesting is those one-on-ones culturally now are held sacred. So it doesn't matter if I've worked with my supervisor the day before or all day up during. It doesn't matter if I had lunch with him. It doesn't matter if I went with a colleague and I have a one-on-one with her. What's interesting is I can do all that up until, let's say it's 2 o'clock. That 2 o'clock is still held sacred. We always do it. And so what we found is when we do that, even though we've talked about work and so many different things, we've created a space for connection. And the younger generation, what's really interesting about it is that connection is absolutely huge. They want to feel, if you want to feel heard, you want to feel disagree better, right? As far as Governor Cox's initiative, if we want to say, here's how I actually feel away from the work, those types of connection meetings have been absolutely huge. And the first thing that we did was did an audit. Where do these take place and can they take place? And if the answer is they don't take place enough or we don't have it in our structure, we need to fix that. But that's what we found to really help.
We've got about 40 seconds. You want to? I think you were interested in talking to this one. So.
Sure. Yeah, the connection piece is so interesting. We're kind of countercultural now in that we're an in-person first culture, and meaning that we have people in the office 4 to 5 days a week. But yeah, some of the younger generation fresh grads were coming in and they're like, I feel disconnected from our team members out in the field. And I was like, okay, what do you suggest? And they came up with this whole plan, and they want the senior leadership to do TikTok videos. They want us to do various, and we're like, we're game, sure, we'll do it. Like whatever you tell us to do, we will do it. If this helps solve this problem and helps you connect across that. So they have great ideas. And so I think sometimes asking them what they need and keeping those things of connection has definitely been a strong theme for us as well with that younger generation.
Terrific. Well, guys, we're out of time. Thank you so much. Give them a round of applause, please.